Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Amy McNee with Informatica, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Jen Mezzio, Global HR Data Officer at First Citizens Bank. So Jen, welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, let's start with just tell us a little bit about your journey into your current role, kind of how you got here and offer any advice to anybody as they're going through their own career journey.
Sure. Yeah. I started my career more in the business analyst realm. Um, but to date myself here, it's been over 25 years. So when we think business analyst 25 years ago, I think a lot of us know that that is really kind of that we did the gamut of everything, right? It was a business systems analyst. We're writing functional specifications. We're looking into back end systems. We didn't have the segregation of not goals, roles like we do now where we may have bigger organizations that have different specialties within that. So in the business systems analyst realm, I also was the systems analyst writing those functional specs, but also looking at the data on the back end. And so some of the projects I did, for example, at MetLife is the long-term care rating algorithm. I had to rate a policy by hand and do all the algorithms so that I could understand it, so that I can write a functional spec so it could be developed. So when you think about that, it's all of the data attributes, how the data is talking, speaking, they work off of each other, right? And at that time, didn't think it was data, it was just business systems analyst. So in my career, continuously doing that type of role, moving a little bit more into management and more broader roles, I got into the as the lead of the claim data warehouse, building the claim data warehouse for travelers in 2008 to 2011. And that's when I really got immersed in warehousing in, I hate to say COBOL code, but, and things like that, where, just really understanding data, the data elements, data pieces, how how it's being built. And that's when I think, I really got the taste of I want to be a data officer. At that time, the data officer role was kind of up and coming, and again, that was 2008 to 2011. And so in my mind, I always had that goal of becoming a data officer, just because I started to really fall in love with data. I went into SVB to be the head of business requirements across the bank. There was an opportunity to move into HR with my boss because of my data background. After about 8 months, I started poking around and saying, hey, are you open to some opportunities to maybe do things a little bit differently here, bring in some governance, streamline some rules, do some cleansing of data? That quickly developed into Jen Mezzio becoming the HR data officer. And then at SVB, I took on as a data officer of cybersecurity and legal as well. I selfishly really do like the privacy and security space of data. So being able to play along with cybersecurity and having that exposure in my toolkit as a data officer, for me personally, I really felt like it rounded out my role.
Yes, well, I don't have that same desire to be the a cybersecurity officer, but I know things have changed. I like you been in the space for I'm a little beyond that, about 30 some odd years now. Unfortunately, there's a 3 in front of my number. But you mentioned something along the way that I think is really it's really I think interesting for a lot of companies right now, and that's governance. And we still see a lot of companies struggling to get their governance program first off the ground, but then to actually make it a core part of the DNA of the company. And I wondered if you had any advice for some things that data leaders should pay attention to in getting their governance program off the ground.
Yeah, that's honestly a really good question. When we look at, like I said, data officers, it's not one size fits all. We have data officers that are very specialized in certain things, like myself would be privacy, security, compliance. You have data officers who are, really focused on analytics. You have data officers that are really focused on data engineering, right? We just all have these different backgrounds, all understanding data. So my advice for individuals and corporations would be to look at the maturity of your organization. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to get into compliance? Are you trying to build and streamline your product data so that you can go out to your clients with ease. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Be real with yourself as an organization, as a corporation, as to what your end goal is and what success looks like. Based on that, you want to look for your qualities in your data officer. If it's getting into compliance, somebody like myself, I've done a lot of compliance work, a lot of getting into compliance, so I'm more familiar with it. Whereas somebody maybe over in the analytics realm, that's not their bread and butter every day. So hiring just a CDO might not be the right fit for what you as an organization are trying to accomplish. And then when it comes to governance, I mean, let's be honest, who likes to be told what to do? And governance is a little bit of that. It's like it's cybersecurity is we're going to keep the data in and the bad people out. Data governance is okay, everyone who's inside, we're going to tell you if you could see the data, how to use the data. We're going to ask you if it's right. We want business rules on it. And for us as data professionals, that's our full-time job. For those individuals that we're asking to instill governance across their business functions, we're asking them, hey, are these data quality rules correct? These individuals almost always have their own full-time job. So we're asking them to take on governance and help us build this muscle in addition to what they do every day. So getting people on board, I think organizations need to understand that these are critical functions you need to have in place as an organization. Whether you're small or large, having control of your data, understanding who sees it, and making sure it's correct, clean, and precise is critical for any success. So you have to understand that you're putting the adoption on folks who already have their day jobs. And as an organization, what does that look like for you?
I think it's a really good point. And that actually dovetails into another question that I have, which is because you're asking people to take something on above and beyond, not just them, but their managers and their people, which means that some of the other priorities might, you might have to share your resource with them. But what are some ways or some tips that you can give to leaders on how to measure the value of governance? Because I hear this all the time from companies that I talk to, is that they're like, well, governance, we struggle with getting governance initiatives going because nobody understands what the business value is. So I'm curious to some of the ways that you've been able to show the value.
Yeah, so some of the ways that we've been able to is, at the time we'll take SVB, for example, we were a global organization. So the way in which we were able to show value is to get into compliance with GDPR, which a lot of companies are global organizations. So getting into compliance, to me, it's kind of an easy thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean GDPR, but it's getting into compliance with HIPAA. It's getting into compliance with all of these other laws that we have out there from a privacy perspective. The value to our business is that your job can be made easier and faster if we take like this piece out of the way. For example, if somebody's working on their reporting and constantly, having to understand the data or, manipulate the data in a way because it's not coming from the source in the way that it should be, those conversations should be had to say, we understand that you have this problem statement downstream. How can we fix this? Right. Other examples are, the value of governance is really, your access and controls. I think people enjoy having access to information, but access to information becomes a liability. And so we don't want to put that burden on folks to say, hey, you have access to everything. And now if something happens, like a data incident or a breach, who's responsible for that? We want to make sure that we're not burdening folks with that type of extremism of any kind of data incidences happening. And we have an understanding of who sees our data, why they're seeing our data, where they're storing it, who they're sharing it with, et cetera.
Yeah, it's that overused phrase from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. I actually think a lot of people who are on the end user side, they don't actually want to be put in a position where they could use the data in the wrong way. I think there's an expectation of those controls protecting them from not doing the wrong thing with information. So that is something that I see companies, continuing to struggle with. And sometimes I think part of it is we think of governance too much as just, it's a place, it's a destination, you go somewhere to get it. And I think one of the things I've been talking to a lot of companies about lately too is, look, governance isn't a destination. It's part of your data journey, and you really need to think of it that way. So it should follow your data, and that's part of its access controls. I think some of it is how you can surface up things like glossary data and so forth, and put it right in the place where people meet the customer, they meet a partner. Some of the conversation that I've been having with companies as well. So that was good though. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and
All
thank
right.
you, because I think you made a good point as well, right? It's not just data governance, it's the data journey. And when I think about that as well, I think of our cyber partners, our IT partners, our business functions, and explaining to them exactly what that life cycle management looks like, what that journey looks like, what we want to achieve. And then when they understand their part in it and their part in change, I think people have a better grasp on adopting governance.
Yeah. Yes. Data doesn't stand still ever. It's
Yep.
always moving around. So thank you so much for joining today, sharing your experience and your story. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And for the audience, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews that we've done. Thank you.